Right. Okay, we're on record now. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Stephen Crow and I shall be chairing the meeting. I will keep everyone very strictly to time because we are time limited this afternoon. When it comes to questions from the panel to the applicant, I would ask that the applicant keeps their answers as brief as possible, and also I've asked panel members to be brief and clear in their questions. So we start off with the presentation from the applicant team. Welcome to the applicant team. This will be for 20 minutes. So I think, Steve, it's over to you to start the presentation, please.
Thank you very much. We're just going to share some drawings.
Okay. You should be able to share now.
Can you all see?
I can.
Yeah, jolly good. Thank you very much. Right, so we've got 60 or so slides to share with you today. Some of them we'll just whiz through very quickly, others we'll spend a little bit of time chatting about. But I think what's really important about this presentation, and you will see this as we look at the slides, is that there has been a sort of significant design evolution through the initial application and where we are today. So I think it's really important for you to see that design evolution, understand how it's moved and where we are today. So the result of this design evolution is, of course, us as a design team very keen to work with Merton's officers and design officers in order to move the scheme forward and to provide a scheme that we're all very happy with. So the first couple of slides that you're going to see is actually the initial design and access statement that supported the first application submission. So I'm just going to whiz through a few slides. For us as architects, it's really important that whenever we're designing a scheme is to look at the constraints, the opportunities, the technical constraints, look at all those elements that we're coming up with a scheme that is right and appropriate for a development. Along with all those bits and pieces, we're obviously looking at policy guidance, we're looking at national design guidance, building for a healthy life. So all those elements are really important to feed in to evolve the scheme forward. I'm just going to move on to the wider setting. So as I say, when you're looking at a development, we're firstly looking at the local area, the wider area, and looking at the opportunities, the connection points, the local facilities. These are all very important points to inform the development and the scheme. And then obviously more closer to the development, the actual boundaries, the characters of the surrounding neighbourhood. So this is, I know you all know the area very well, but very useful to see the site as an aerial photograph with the site outlined in red. And you can see the immediate boundaries, the landscaping, the building form, the urban grain. So this was a piece of work that was done initially for the original application. So just looking at the building typology, the characters, the architectural influences around the site. So having a good understanding of that is really important to evolve the scheme forward. So Meadowview Road, as you all know, a later development, more contemporary in its form, in its appearance and design. And then the remainder of the periphery roads, Grand Drive, Greenway and Westway, more traditional 1930s, elegant terraces, very common to the area, which makes up the sort of general character of the locality, if you like. Also then looking at the site itself, its constraints, its opportunities, and every site has a number of these. This site itself, it's looking specifically at the boundaries of the sites, at the landscape, the interaction with the adjacent neighbouring properties is obviously very important to be aware of. There's an existing private play area just in the top right-hand corner. Obviously, this is a very good indication of connection points and desire lines across the site, but also just indicating some of the sort of subtle level differences. There are some issues regarding water retention, surface water. that we'll talk about shortly. So this is really just identifying some of the constraints, some of the opportunities, and that really informing the way that the scheme is moved forward in itself. Just to the top left-hand corner there, of course, is the tennis courts. So, as I said, the scheme has evolved throughout the process. So I don't want to talk too much about this scheme. And this was the initial application submission. So it was the result of doing that early analysis and working through policy and all those things we talked about to come up with a scheme which formed the basis of our initial application. And once that was submitted, the responses back that we had from Merton, they made it very clear that they felt that there was an opportunity here for a much more urban, higher density scheme. So along with that, we as a team decided to go away and review where we were and very much start from scratch, start looking at alternative schemes. And what we produced was a response document. So this was much more contemporary scheme with higher density. So this really was a response to some of the earlier comments that came back from the council. The beginnings of the document sort of looked at some of the influences that Merton had suggested towards us, and these were some of the photographs that they sent to us of sort of more urban, more contemporary forms of development as a sort of suggestion and a guide of how we could take the new proposals forward. So what was rather nice for us is actually this development here, which was suggested that we take some reference to, it is actually a development that our practice designed, and it's one that we're very pleased with and has won some awards. So it was really nice to see that as a response back. It's something that we as a practice had worked on ourselves. So we started to look at evolving the scheme forward. So a very different scheme. So one that was previously more suburban in its form was going to become more urban, higher density, and a different style of development to some of those peripheries. I guess really sort of reinforcing the more contemporary form that was seen on the opposite side of Meadowview. So there are a number of things that we were sort of guided to that should be included in our scheme, and that was introducing areas of open space into the centre of the site. In terms of orientation, we've got a very nice north-south, east-west axis. So we were looking at things like the orientation of buildings, the solar gain, PV. How could the form of the development be influenced by that? So there's just some early illustrations there. Strong, well-designed perimeter blocks, securing back-to-back amenities was obviously another one. So another illustration of how we seek to address that. And again, some more perimeter blocks there. I talked earlier about sort of constraints and opportunities of the site. And like all sites, they have a number of these, and this site is no different. And we mentioned in one of the earlier slides that there is some overland flooding and drainage issues which currently stand on the site. So the proposals that we're doing, we're seeking to review that and obviously make some enhancements and also resolve the additional numbers of units that we're putting on site. So dealing with that is a significant factor of the development, and that's something that's always been read in conjunction with it and has influenced the proposals, and something that we've discussed and worked with Merton about. So the areas here just shown in blue show the opportunity for dealing with those flood compensation measures and drainage related systems. So some lighter blue there, and also the opportunity for some SUDs and some drainage ideas within the site and along the boundaries. So the results of all that were a layout that sort of generated 122 units, a mixture of flats and houses. We presented this scheme to the local authority, and it came with a number of rather nice illustrations. I mean, this is just illustrating the orientation with PVs on the roofs, illustrating how we could angle the rooftop so that we've got sawtooth gable frontages, And obviously, not only is that dealing with the orientation, but obviously it's creating quite a striking design feature in our proposal. So a number of sort of sketches there, just illustrating the evolving proposals of our thoughts, some sort of landscaping issues. So, you know, in higher density areas where you may have smaller gardens, you're creating what are very usable, high quality landscape public spaces. So all very important details of more higher density schemes. And then just onto some elevations, as we said earlier, there was sort of the influences that come from Merton. We were seeking to inform our proposals. These are the more contemporary properties opposite Meadowview Road. And these are some of the illustrations from the site that I mentioned earlier that Merton forwarded over to us. So looking at how we could respond to that architecture in this contemporary form. So some early ideas on some elevational styles moving forward, thinking about the elevations and the building forms together. Right, so on to our now current proposals. The results of forwarding that response document to Merton was that we had some further discussions to move the scheme forward. So I think this is quite a useful illustration. You'll see underneath here a CAD drawing, which is the previous layout. And in this next stage of negotiation with Merton, there were sort of three driving factors of how we would move the scheme forward. Firstly, as I've mentioned, the issues relating to drainage and to deal with flooding and compensation, the need and to provide open space areas for sports, recreation, the tennis courts, and then the last response was a change of building development form, if you like, as a result of the two earlier things I just mentioned, and that we were now seeking to provide the flood compensation and the drainage measures all within the surface of the land itself. So our earlier proposal had a bigger development area, but we were providing storage crates under the ground. So through discussions with Merton, it was very much a necessity to provide that requirement at ground level and avoid the use of crates. So if there's any specific questions on that, we can talk to that shortly. David's here, who's done a lot of work on the drainage. And then just back to the third issue, following our discussions with Merton, they were very keen to reorientate the development cell. So that was actually responding more to the Meadowview Road frontage than the sort of adjacent internal boundaries. So the results of balancing all those things, the open space, the drainage and the new development envelope was a new development area, a more regimented grid, sort of defined by the purple line. And this was really the extent of balancing all those elements through discussion with Merton. So I'm just going to pop to the next slide now. As part of those sort of discussions at this stage, this was a layout that was sent across from Merton, sort of looking at perimeter blocks, parking areas, amenity spaces, and you know, quite sort of a regimented perimeter block layout with very defined public and private spaces. And this was very much part of the discussion as a way to move the scheme forward. Now we had this more rectangular form. So there's elements of this scheme that we've looked at in terms of the parking laybys to the frontage and private front gardens, and some properties that have parking directly on front. So just looking at reassessing the constraints of the site, as I said, we've now got a more regimented development cell, and its relationship and connection to Meadowview Road is the driving factor in this revised scheme. Pedestrian desire lines crossing the site. So again, very important constraints and opportunities of the site, connection points from A to B and B to C. There is an existing footpath that runs, I say an existing footpath, it is a trodden path. It's not a public right of way, but there's an existing footpath from B to C which isn't used a great deal, but through discussions with Merton, we talked about the opportunity of moving this away from this more sensitive boundary through the site itself. So those pedestrian design lines are very important to include within our scheme. Areas of open space. So we talked earlier about the provision of open space. So the tennis courts located in the top left-hand corner, a Muga, children's play area, outdoor gym equipment. So all those elements that we're able to create in this sort of arc of landscaping, if you like, which sort of wraps around the development cell. So relating the green spaces to the built form. So you can see, as I say, it wraps around the built form. The influences, the important matters relating to offsite elements. So clusters of housing, which has got a sense of openness in landscaping between. And we've talked already about the frontage of Meadowview Road, important relationships that we need to consider. Creating secure perimeter blocks which overlook those spaces, making them feel safe and secure. And as we just mentioned, we've got those public rights of way, new rights of way, if you like, that can cross the site, the development. And then really just looking more insular at the development itself, how the development cells can start coming together, whilst at the same time achieving appropriate residential amenities, separation distances, privacy, and all those bits and pieces. So bringing green space into the development through, so you still get those glimpses from Meadowview Road of the open space in the distance. Really important just to allow the landscaping to filter through the site and give a sense of openness. And then just slowly working up blocks of perimeter blocks, public and private spaces, and then really a simplified development structure of development cells, apartments, houses, open space. You can see the general structure of the development coming together. And all this resulted in a sort of more detailed layout. So we started to look at parking, gardens, you know, what sort of number of units could be accommodated in this scheme. And this was, I think this, of the third stage of the development evolution, this was what was presented to Merton. And following a design workshop, we talked around alterations to the scheme. So Merton, we discussed the blue lines, which they sent back to us. So this is really about altering the build lines. So you can see here sort of common build line tying into the adjacent properties, a softer build line on the corner, a softer build line on these relationships. So it was really just looking to see how we could alter the scheme. Of course, this scheme is already based on a quantified land area to deal with the drainage. So what it was really to go back and have a review of the sort of technical constraints to see if we could adapt the development parameters and still achieve the right requirement for the drainage, and then obviously just alter the site to suit. So as we worked through that, the scheme started evolving in a number of sketches, which ultimately resulted in this layout, sort of very quick blocky plan. And as you can see here now, development now tying into the adjacent build lines, bigger perimeter blocks there with streets between. And the result of that is a more worked up CAD layout. So again, now this is started to look at parking, gardens. You can see that quite clearly there, the development forms and the land use spaces. So in terms of the layout, this is where we've evolved the scheme to date to Merton. I don't believe they've seen this layout as of yet, but it has included the number of changes. And as I said earlier, I think it was really important for you to understand the sort of evolution and the journey that we've been on. And each time we've actively responded to those comments to move the scheme forward. In terms of elevation proposals, I mentioned the scheme earlier, so these are some photographs from that scheme. In terms of our proposals going forward, although the elevations are bespoke and unique to this site, elements of that character will be seen in the building. So elegant windows, floor-to-ceiling windows, attractive brick detailing, so pulled header brick detailing, rather than, we've all seen those sort of buildings with a mixture of materials that weather after a certain amount of time. You know, much better to look at quality brickwork with brickwork detailing. So this is the form of development, architectural appearance that we are moving forward on. And then in terms of the apartment buildings, as I said earlier, it's really important to create that response to the more modern architecture on Meadowview Road. Something we are doing something different from it, but it has elements to respond to those more contemporized form, and you'll probably recognise the sort of horizontal recessed banding detail that are on those buildings, which are sort of broken by the vertical element. So I think that's just a sort of general overview of the sort of design evolution of the scheme. We're at a stage where we believe we've got a scheme that Merton are happy with. We as a design team are very pleased with the way that it's evolved, and this is very much is going to be the layout for our forthcoming future application submission. There's still a fair amount of work to do to complete that work, and obviously today's meeting is very well timed so that we can get some feedback from you guys to feed into the application submission as well. So I think that's it from me for now, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's the most interesting presentation. We now move on to the questions from panel members. Could you take the presentation down, please, Steve?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Panel members, who would like to start off this 15 minutes of questions and answers? Tony and then Cordula.
Just to clarify, relative to your flood scheme, I know your FRA is 164 pages, so there's quite a lot of it. And it was talking about a cascade system, because you're talking about flood mitigation, and I was looking at it as attenuation. So can you just clarify what the open space is meant to do in terms of its flood functions?
Yes, certainly the FRA is quite bulky in terms of what it's dealing with. It's also addressing two aspects, one which is the flooding and one which is the on-site drainage. So they're slightly separate but interlinked. The flooding aspect that we're dealing with is a mitigation impact on what's there. So we're looking at profiling the lower ground level to accommodate additional flows in excess of what is required in that area. So providing additional betterment to the local area, additional storage in those peak storms, which overall should provide a reduction in overall flood impact in the area as well. The on-site drainage is being addressed as part of a cascade system. We're looking at a multiple set of SUD systems, so permeable paving, swell systems, rainwater gardens into a basin, which will provide the ultimate attenuation and storage on site of the peak runoff storm. And that is up to a 1 in 100 plus 40% storm event. And that will be restricted down to a peak discharge rate of 6.3 litres per second, in line with the London guide. And that will offer significant betterment in terms of what the natural runoff from that area, from that site to the southern and the western boundary is, and will ease and profile out the impact onto the local drainage network as well.
In that flooding impact, at the Rains Park Forum a couple of weeks ago, we had Merton and Thames Water discussing why Rains Park has flooded 3 times in 5 years. So I just wonder how robust this frequency of inundation is relative to what is now being expected with climate change.
We've been taken under consultation with the EA and with the LFA with regard to the design criteria, and that's laid down by current guidance, which is working to the 1 in 100 plus 40% design storm. The frequency of those events occurring, as we know, climate change is a key factor that needs consideration, and that's built into the way that we're modelling the network and looking to provide that additional and above additional storage for this site, which should offer that benefit to the local residents as well.
So is the southwest corner of the site, where the AOD is about 15, always going to be either inundated or a pretty soggy kind of piece of landscape?
It's only in peak storm events that the water level will reach that event. That's based on the EA modelling. So actually the natural scenario is that the water will not be there. It just provides that exceedant storm event that it would be in that position.
Because, I mean, I think you've already decided that infiltration is not going to be possible as well in that area.
Correct, yes. The site investigation works, which was undertaken on the northern site, the existing Meadowview site, shows that it's underlain by clay, so there isn't a natural means of infiltration. So we need to look at a positive discharge, and the key bit is restricting that as best we can and effectively and treating it so that we can provide a betterment to the downstream network.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm following up on that on the lands, really, 2 points really. I assume the local authority is going to have to take on board and look after all of the green space, unless there's some form of service charge to fund the upkeep of the green space, as one query. And I'm not sure I've seen in the landscape proposals or when they're going to be fleshed out, they need to respond to these hydraulic conditions as well, because we need an appropriate landscape that's robust, but also takes advantage of biodiversity and the ecology possibilities with the habitats we can create with the water scheme as well.
Just to come in there, in terms of the management of the green and open spaces, that will be done by a management company. And then in terms of responding, in terms of the landscape treatment, there's a landscape architect working with David so that the landscape can complement the flooding strategy on mitigation across the site. So they work together.
How is a private company funded though? Sorry, is that going to be a service charge on everybody, every occupant?
So that would be a service charge to the occupants of the development, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Probably
Okay.
to add to add in terms of the ecology that you mentioned, the drainage system, the suds, the swales offer significant natural habitat, so it does contribute in that regard to the local ecology as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cordula and then Tim, please. You're muted, Cordula.
Okay, no good then. My main question is what your thoughts on, basically you're creating a new community here, a substantial amount of units, and what your strategy is in terms of enabling for these people to live together as a community, and the hierarchy of and diversity of the open spaces. You know, they're more intimate ones for grouping a few of the buildings. But basically how you think the placemaking strategy. Then my next question was, are you actually knitting access into the neighborhood, or is the main access just from Meadowview Road? Is it a ring road, or will you sort of connect into those little cul-de-sacs? I couldn't quite see that. And then the similar question is, it would be great if it was more obvious that so the flood problem is obviously I think you've definitely solved that technically, but how can this enhance the quality of life for the people living around there? How can these suds and new ecosystems be really obvious and can be part of the experience? So
Will I start off with the placemaking?
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you want me to bring the layout back up?
Yeah, by all means. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll see it.
Yep.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of the form of development, what's really important to us in designing a layout is to create those community spaces, encouraging people to socialize, kids to play in those play areas. So it is a higher density scheme. All of the properties, certainly the houses, have private space gardens, but I think what's really important and to the success of the scheme is those more public spaces. So we've got I guess 3 different types of spaces. We've got the private spaces, we've got the more intimate landscape spaces, which sort of are directly adjacent to properties where maybe younger children would go. And then we've got larger areas of open space where you've got community integration, you've got areas for children to kick balls around and engage in those areas there. So it's really important that you've got those distinctive areas, different types of amenity spaces for people to use. So I think in terms of creating those spaces, the placemaking, the landscaping, the quality, the location, what's in those spaces are really, really important. I don't know at this point if David just wants to talk about the facilities in the landscaping areas that we're proposing.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So you've got, and again, if Steve, if you could use your hand on the
I shall
items. So we move from the sort of top left of the more formal provision, which is pay and play tennis managed by the tennis club, through to a kickabout formal small Muga area, which also happens to be the same or correct specification for padel courts, which is particularly good for complete newcomers and children to work. You then move more open space into the round oval area, which has an outdoor gym. Then connected, as you can see, through the path networks, which allow walking and jogging routes into the more informal areas with a central area of play. The play will actually be away from those paths. It's just physically located there. The paths won't run through it. But the play is brought to be close at the end of the main access on that area. So it's seen, overseen, close to, but still within a wider sense of space. You also asked about knitting into the community areas and the other roads. So Steve, you could just point out the desire line from the bottom which then cuts up through 2 or 3 routes optional up and through to the roads on either side. We have cycling running through the top of Meadow Road, an existing route east to west, and that's maintained and supported.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had some good questions and some good answers, but we are running a bit tight for time. So if we could speed things up a little, that would be of great assistance. Tim, your question, please, and then Gazina.
Hi, just a couple of points of clarification. One is, can you show me a plan of what land you own on the site? And secondly, how many housing units are you proposing to provide? Thanks.
Just in terms of the land ownership, Julian, I don't know if you want to add in, but the red line boundary is the application submission. And then Julian, can you comment on the road?
Yeah, so that's right, Steve. Hi there, it's Julian Goodman here from Bellway. The development to the north of the road, and again, Steve, if you could identify where that is a development that was bought or was developed by Bellway in the early 2000s, maybe as late. I think it was we were sold by about 2008, 10. This piece of land remains in Bellway's ownership and has basically become redundant open space. And so the red line is it forms part of the application boundary, and that's all within Bellway's ownership.
Could I just quickly add, the open space had no public access and hasn't had public access. It's open space only in terms of visual.
Okay.
Sorry, just to explain, you've said what's your application. So what is the total amount of land you own? So do you own the access path that goes, I assume, to the west? Do you own
to the west, I could check on that. I imagine that is owned by now the management company of the development to the north. Hence the reason for the sort of slightly odd and wiggly red line, if you follow me there.
Okay, so the tennis club to the north is owned separately.
Correct. That was developed by Bellway and then handed over to the tennis club.
So it's been sold and it's no longer owned by Bellway.
No, that's why it's outside that red line.
Okay.
Same with the apartments and same with the houses.
All right, so they have been sold. Okay.
Correct.
You still own the access road Meadow View. Is that right?
We have rights over it. Yes. So that was developed by us. We built the houses, sold the houses. It's not a publicly owned road, but we have retained rights across across the road.
Sure. And the number of housing units you're proposing?
Steve, can you just remind me of that? We have one.
Sorry, I should have that off the top of my head, but I haven't.
I think it's
This scheme
108.
at the moment looks at 108 units, but we're
Thank
still
you.
refining it as we're tweaking it ahead of a resubmission of an updated
That's
scheme.
correct. And just to, I don't know if you are aware, the application went in for a proposal for 89 units. And this scheme is obviously increasing the density, but this was really in response to urban design officer comments from Merton Council. I think it's fair to say, Steve, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we took really an approach of knitting in with the more sort of suburban housing to the south, to the east and to the west, rather than the Bellway development to the north. And the urban design offer was looking at it really as an opportunity to provide a more dense, more urban vernacular as opposed to a suburban. And that's really what's generated the increase in unit numbers.
So just roughly 50% of the dwellings are houses.
Could you clarify what the meaning of what is yellow and what is brown? Is the brown not vehicular access or?
So the vehicular access, these are just surface treatment. So this may be a block paver or a buff block paver, but this is the vehicular access around the site. There's a more intimate mews access route in there, if you like. And there's an access route in there. So they're just surface materials.
But they're all vehicular. They're all not car free.
No.
Okay, thank you. Jazine, your question, please.
Yes, my question is around the existing. You say there's a private play space. Can you?
There, yeah.
Yeah. Has any work or intent being done on how that could form a part of the redevelopment and engagement with community and placemaking strategy?
So it's certainly not part of the application. It's under a separate ownership. What has been important in the way that we've evolved the scheme, I'll just zoom in, is that although it has its own boundary and it is out of ownership, what we're trying to do is provide the building forms to around that area, so it can police it and overlook it, and ultimately it just becomes and blends with part of the existing landscape. So we've got some landscaping on our site which will blend in with that area there itself. So we are restricted to what we can do to it, but what we can do is make sure that it's well overlooked and that the landscaping, the way that it's planted and the species will allow it to blend more and make it feel part of the development.
Okay, thank you very much. Sharia, have you a question at this stage, or are your concerns been addressed?
Yes, I don't have any question. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Marcus, is there anything that you would like to cover that hasn't been covered? Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps we could just take down the shared screen again, please.
Yes, I'll do.
It's quite useful though to look at it when we talk about it. No.
I can
Okay,
bring it
well,
back up.
yeah.
I can just click on if you
Just
Put
have
it
that
back
layout
up. It
one up.
just makes me, it's difficult for me to see who wants to speak, but put it back up, that's fine.
I can pop it backwards and forwards if you want. It's certainly no problem.
No, okay, super. Well, we move now on to the stage where panel members give their views. So I think we have 4 minutes for each panel member if they want to speak for that long. Who would like to start me off? Tony, was that you waving?
No, I could do it. I think that in all housing, the quality of the setting becomes a critical element here. And I think that we've got to see a thoroughly worked out scheme that deals with the opportunities and deals with the surface water drainage and the practicalities of looking after this as well. Because just a clarification, if the management company is looking after the landscape, I assume they're also looking after the drainage characteristics that go with it, and that's being offered up as well. So I think we really need to see an integrated scheme, and that is a critical part of the application. It shouldn't really be just a reserve matter that's left too late in the process. I think we should have it brought forward.
Okay, thank you. Cordelia, would you like to give us your thoughts, please?
Quick question. What did you mean? What needs to be brought forward, Tony? Because I'm taking the notes.
Well, I just think the trouble is sometimes you can start, but it needs to be a pre-commencement condition rather than something which is left to be dealt with during the course of the works before occupation. So I think it's an important thing that we see it early on, that it isn't left to the end of the process, because I think it's a fundamental element to how people enjoy their spaces overall. And sometimes people often like their flat, but they don't like the setting. And the important thing is just to get the setting right and the quality of life for people and children and all multi-generational to be outside, really.
Absolutely. My comments are also, if you could put the plan back up, I would find it really useful. Yeah, my original question about the sort of the community you're creating, I think you're right. You have lots of great different types of spaces and the green space around it. But if you're thinking of sort of younger families and younger children, it's it might be it would be great to see a bit more within the development of front door play. So you said, it's really good on the west side, on that sort of bigger space. I think I can imagine it working there with overlooking and kids being sort of independent. I was also wondering whether there was any way of maybe taking the parking out of within the development, or maybe pushing that a bit more to the perimeter to have less cars, even though there won't be that much traffic, but there still is traffic to every corner of the development.
At this part of the presentation, are we allowed to answer, or are we just listening?
I think it would be better if we could have an answer to that particular question now, please. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Certainly in terms of the parking standards on site, we have discussed those through the design evolution with Merton, and we do have a reduced parking standard on site at the moment. So we have taken a number of parking spaces out of the scheme. I think for me, it's really important that the parking sort of becomes part of the landscaping. So you'll see that a majority of the parking space are actually lay-by spaces, which, when cars are not in those, it just blends with the hard and soft landscaping surface material. So they're not dominant things in the street scene themselves. And we are thinking that there will be a low number of people having cars on this site, and therefore we feel the reduced standard is right and important.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I say maybe there's a possibility to sort of make it a one-way street to really have the minimum carriageway width, and then push these parking spaces sort of slightly away from the houses, so that's more generous pavement. Was also wondering whether there is enough front-to-front relationship, which is only sort of vaguely happens on the vertical roads, but apart from that, all the entrances aren't facing any other entrances, especially on the perimeter box.
Sorry, whereabouts are you talking about?
Sorry, this is here we have proper front-to-front door relationship.
Yeah.
On the middle, and then sort of slightly less, but still here.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But nowhere else. So I'm wondering on the perimeter whether there is something to think about, whether the gardens should be, you know, that
These here.
maybe there's more of a sort of communal space here where people all access the houses, so that helps to create sort of community and incidental meeting, etc.
Yeah, I think
And these are all, there's no, there doesn't seem to be sort of a core or kind of a space that everyone goes through.
I think what's really important about it is there are different street characters. So it's you know, there's a hierarchy defined in a much wider street with a certain type of planting, parking, and you know, wider carriageway. And then you do have a more intimate mews. So they're very defined characters within the layout. I mean, it's not a big layout, but even in a smaller layout like this, you do have very distinctive characters. And I think that is important. I think ultimately there is a wealth of public open space and landscaping space around the site.
No, that's absolutely true, and everyone has access to it, and there's a great quality of this site. But I'm just, you know, it doesn't really kind of support kind of neighborly relationships with the whole within the whole scheme. And that's the next thing I was wondering, whether the hierarchies seem ever so slightly arbitrary. You know, why is that one road so much more prominent than, or so much more important than the others? Would it be that maybe the central one, the central axis?
The reason this one is wider is we've had a lot of discussion about this existing.
Sorry, Chair, we don't have time for long answers today.
I think
so these are just sort of thoughts. Yeah, I have, because we haven't like seen the kind of whole development. We just saw 2 drawings, so it's quick catching up, quick thoughts I have.
Yes, let's try and move this phase to comments by the panel only, because I don't think we have time to go back and forward. So yes, if you just make your comments.
The next one is like the flats are, you know, they have the not the least well developed sort of access to the open spaces and to kind of communal spaces. And there seem to be a separate thing to the, even though formally, obviously, it looks at all, it's all one thing, but in terms of how that is managed, I'd be interested to see more development. I also think stylistically, the kind of sketches you showed for the houses and the flats are, I think they could be more similar, or more of one, you know, one aesthetic language, in my view. But most importantly, I think the kind of the way particularly children get around that site could be improved.
Okay, thank you very much. Tim, what are your comments, please, and then Sharia.
Well, thank you. I'll speak to the plan because it's, as others have said, it's really helpful. Hi, my name is Tim Long. I'm a landscape architect. I'm an urban designer. I'm a town planner, but I primarily focus on transport and the public realm. So I see quite a lot of this site, and I think the starting point for me is, as I understand it, is it's open space and it's not designated for housing yet. So I'd have thought that any design that comes forward would have to be special, would have to set new standards and be really exemplary. And I don't think this is quite there yet. So in particular, let's start from the top. What London needs is lots more housing. It's got chronic housing shortage, huge house prices, and needs lots more housing. What London's got too much of is cars. It's got too much cars, it's got too much congestion, it's got too much air pollution, it's got too much climate change. So what I think you should be looking at here is far more of a home zone design. And building on the point my colleague Cordelia made was, I think what you should do really is have a single carriageway lane that goes around the site, and that is used for collection of waste and delivery of people. So the sort of people who are going to be buying this will be under 40, and that demographic has had huge reduction in car ownership and car use, and they are moving to things like Uber, they're moving to things like electric scooters, they are not buying cars. And I think the challenge you've got on this site obviously is that there is no parking control, so you have to design out any spaces that can be used for parking. So literally you want a single lane around this development lined by bollards, so people can't just park willy-nilly where they like and own cars and stuff like that. That does 2 things. It reduces a lot of the hard paving that you're providing. So it means much better drainage, much more landscaping, and much more sort of communal design of the public spaces. So I think those are some big wins you can get quite quickly. I think also, as Cordelia was alluding, you can also come up with a sort of a simpler layout. The sort of houses seem to be at sort of wonky angles. The gardens seem to have sort of funny backs to them and things like that. And that you can get a simpler, more economic layout. Moving to the public space, yeah, I like a lot of it. I don't really understand why you're providing a huge car park for 2 tennis courts. That to me seems like a complete oxymoron. Why are you driving to go to a health facility? So get rid of the car parking. That's just, again, just a waste of paving. The tennis courts, again, I imagine they're paved and they'll be very low use because people have got to pay and then only 2 or maybe 4 people use the court. So again, I would reconsider that. Maybe it's informal play of some sort. It can be used far more intensively by the residents. So I think there's quite a lot you can get out of this. And then I think finally, sort of the connections to the adjacent spaces. Obviously, if the entrance road is blocked, pedestrians and cyclists need to be able to get out of the site. So in particular, on the western side, there's a drop curb there, but for some reason, parking is still allowed in front of a drop curb, which is bizarre. So the council needs to tidy things like that up. And I suppose finally, all these paths need to be disabled accessible, as any new path would need to be. And as a result, that means that they'll be cyclable and they'll be able to be used by people with scooters. So I think you need to design it looking forward to enable people to use these spaces and not sort of being modest and then realizing that you can't or you want to restrict various types of activity in the space. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tim. Sharia?
Thanks.
Chair, would it be possible just to come back on the parking point? Because I think one thing that we didn't raise as part of our presentation is that we'd undertaken 3 or 4.
Can I just stop you there, please? Because we are running a bit short of time. If there's time at the end, I'll let you come back in. But I think we need to hear the panel's comments because that potentially is the most useful thing for you to hear what the panel think.
Yes, I just wanted to feedback what local residents have fed back to us in relation.
Local residents will always want more parking.
Yeah.
Every single development the world's ever seen.
Correct. But local residents also have a voice in terms of community consultation. They have they're an important part of the existing community, and what we don't want to
prefer to see the site undeveloped.
Overspill car parking.
That's true, but they would also prefer the site to be undeveloped completely. So we can't give total credence to that. I do agree with the chair that we ought to try and make some design, give you some design feedback, because the parking issue is intractable and will take up all our time if we get involved in it.
Yeah, that is planning policy, really, and we're talking about design today. So, Sharia, can we have your comments, please?
Yes, thanks very much. Thanks for the presentation. It's quite useful to see this plan. The first thing it comes to my mind, I think it's quite nice that you have got this large area of landscaping, which makes it much more attractive when you see it this way. There seems to be a disconnect between what has been designed in terms of the housing scheme, the blocks, and this landscape. It would have been really much better if we could see this landscape growing into your housing design, into the areas, and connect it better. It is in a sense that there's one park, then you've got 2 streets, and then parking all around. And I think that is a slight missed opportunity. The block of flats, their sort of inner court, I don't see anything coming up there. It feels quite kind of empty, and it doesn't feel there is life in it. And so I think it could really help, and it could make the scheme a lot better if there was a better connection of landscaping and the positioning of the houses and a block of flats. I don't really see that. And it's a great opportunity with an amazing site that you could do this. I totally agree with the parking. The streets, although one of them is wider, gives you green space, it's kind of, I don't know, I still think it lacks character. And the other thing that, again, my colleagues referred to is the two very different style. The block of flats almost look like for the kind of 50s kind of style of design, and the house is very different with the pitch roofs and so on. It would be really nice if also in terms of design, they are better connected, in terms of what the appearance is better connected. There's a disconnect between them. And I would urge you to look at the block of flats a lot more, and I think see how you can make it much more attractive than it is. I think it's kind of requires more life in it. These are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marcus, would you like to give us your thoughts, please?
Yes, well, initially I didn't quite know what to say about this scheme, but having listened to the presentation and other colleagues' comments, I do have something to say about it. My question is, at what point have you arrived when you come into this development? Where is the sense of arrival? Where is the place that you actually get to? Because what I'm seeing is a site that's currently green and a site owner who is a developer who wants to sprinkle some houses on it, and an architect who puts together a kind of fairly, a suburban layout, and a local council that then starts taking out its pencil and telling the architect to shift this and shift that and whatever. And so you end up with a kind of hodgepodge where the architect will do whatever is necessary to get planning. And the planning authority wants to have a really beautiful scheme here, but can't design it itself. And so you get a kind of P-shaped road layout with a little pipe-shaped bit of green space around it, which happens to be where the low-lying land is. And then I look at the cars, and my colleagues always kind of draw our attention to cars. And I think if I lived in block 1, I would have to drive all the way around to the south of the site and all the way up the middle of that southern road to get to my parking space at the back. And I just think if you went to the Bartlett and got them to do a space syntax analysis of this and just analyze the kind of the road miles that would be wasted over the lifetime of the development by organizing the parking to be right in the most inaccessible part of the site. And my kind of, there are sort of practical things that I feel are wrong about it. There's a whole attitude to the site which seems to be about dropping units in rather than placemaking. And how do we unlock this thing of placemaking? You've got a kind of fairly semi-informal suburban development from the early to mid 20th century around, acres and acres of it. And then you've got this little bit of green space in the middle. Do you just let the character of the surrounding development, which has got no particular kind of, where are the places of arrival in the surrounding development? You've got St. Saviour's Church, you've got some stuff happening in the bottom of Grand Drive, you've got the orientation of Grand Drive itself. It's got some logic, some hierarchy to it. But here we're in a sort of backwater off that, sort of cul-de-sac off Grand Drive. And it's got a tennis club there. And I just feel the development needs to have an idea, a place where you arrive and you say, I've got there. And when I understand that this has been a kind of, you've almost been letting the council lead you here and lead you there. But it makes it very difficult for us if you don't have a very strong idea of what place you're going to make. And it's 120 houses. I mean, it's actually quite a big development. So I do have problems with it, and the most helpful thing I can suggest is that you try and understand where the center of your site is, and make it somewhere that when you actually get to the center of your site, it might be somewhere where blocks 1 and 2 are, I don't know, that you can say, ah, I've arrived. But I don't like the vehicle circulation. I really think that's a dead giveaway, that something is kind of quite wrong with it, that you have to drive all the way around the perimeter road and up the middle just to park.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't be more positive, but that's my.
Thank you, Marcus. That's helpful. Jazine, would you like to share your thoughts, please?
Yeah, hello, my name is Gesine. I'm also an urban designer. I'm afraid you're getting a lot of urban design landscape people today, but this is really important because it's such a landscape scheme. I very much agree with the other panelists, and to keep it short, you have a fantastic site. Where do we have in London areas like this where you can build a new little community with outlook onto a green space, which could be really special? And it's a suburban location, it's still in London, it's got so many things to go for. I can't see that speciality of that site and that opportunity being translated in your proposal. Where's the vision? What type of community you're thinking might come here together that makes this particular development really stand out? And there's so many themes you could play on, work with, to make this a location where the neighbors should be envious about it. They should be wanting to sell their semi-detached or terrace next door immediately and buy a property there because it's so good and so lovely. And I think that ambition, I can't see that yet in the development, but the site is so special, it really needs that level. It's worth that level of ambition. So yeah, the technical bits the other panelists have commented on, I would like to see much more to get out of this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the panel's comments. So in a moment, I'll ask Kadula to summarise those, and then we'll move on to the RAG rating. I'd just like to say that I sense that there have been comments made, and the applicant would like to make comments in exchange. I think the point is this is a start of a process. So where we are now is we'll be producing minutes, and it's up to the applicant really to think about what has been said, and we will move on to a process whereby you can take on board what panel members have said, comment about that, and all that will be considered in due course. So Gordula, can I just ask you now to kind of summarise what panel members have said, please?
I think that the general main message of all panel members is that is what Gesine just said at the end, that the very special nature of the site really deserves a kind of outstanding scheme of creating a new community and a new kind of sustainable urban living together. And that could be achieved. Lots of panel members commented on the vehicular access and the parking, that the parking should be designed out. There should be a kind of center point or kind of communal central space, whether it's actually physically in the center or not, for the community, a sense of arrival, Marcus was saying. I think there's different, obviously lots of people are designing these kind of housing projects at the moment in London, and one of them that Tim mentioned is a kind of home zone design, and that's very much related of how you design the street and the parking again. So a very strong point, less parking, less cars. Then the disconnect between that extraordinary landscape around this, and is there a way of connecting the housing estate more with the nature of the surroundings? And there's been an improvement in the sort of actual aesthetic and design of the objects themselves, definitely. I forgot I was summarizing, so this is a bit sketchy. Does anyone else, can anyone add to that, or does that sum it up?
I think that probably sums it up, actually. I think we'll move on to the red, amber, green scores now. So thank you, Cordula. Tony, perhaps you would like to kick off by giving us what you think an appropriate rating is at this stage in the process. You're muted, Tony.
It was useful to see where it's come from and where it's got to. So I think that it's sort of amber to the stage they've got. There are clearly areas of refinement that are still worth considering. And I think the landscape is an important, what is in the landscape, the purpose it serves, and all those elements need to be fleshed out. And it's a bit thin on the ground on that at the moment. There are certainly certain corners, like this, I don't know if you can see that on that corner of the building around here, which seems very jerky. There are just pieces that need to be straightened out, and what that's doing at the piece of back of another space, I don't know, when it could be cleaned up. There's refinement, so I think amber would be my verdict.
Thank you, Tony. Tim, would you like to share your verdict, please?
I think similar to Tony, I think it's good to see the evolution of the scheme, although the previous scheme was very suburban, so it wasn't really suitable for London. It was even lower density than the adjacent housing. So it's come some way, but I think it needs to go a lot further. It needs to really, I mean, as Jazine said, this is a new community. It should be an amazing place where others in the area want to come and live. So I want to see that sort of ambition.
Thank you very much.
What was your verdict then?
Sorry, it was amber, but red to amber, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Sharia, could you give us your verdict, please?
Sure, yes. It's red, but amber towards red. I think the lot needs to be done further.
Okay. Thank you very much. Marcus, your rating, please.
Red.
Red. Okay.
And me too.
Jazine, is that? So who said me too?
Cordula.
Cordula.
It's improved, but it needs to become. It's not there yet at all. I think.
So you're saying red. Okay. Jazine.
I'm afraid it's red as well.
Okay. So I score that as 3 people saying red, 2 people saying red amber, and 1 person saying amber. Is that your conclusion as well, Paul Garrett? Hello, Paul.
I think he's.
No, he's not there, is he?
Hi.
Oh,
Can you
hello,
hear me?
Paul. Yes, I was.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Sorry,
hear you.
I was on.
Yes.
I was just saying.
On mute. Sorry. Yes. Yes, I do. I do concur with you, Stephen. Yes, I was taking down notes. 3 reds, 2 red ambers, and an amber, which does make it a red. What I want to take away from this is because I had poor connection during the summary, but I think it's a pretty simple summary. Is it's come a reasonable way. It's not there yet. The main thing is it's not special, and it ought to be special. And there's issues of connectivity between the surroundings and between different parts of the site and the open space. And then there's how to deal with the cars successfully. I think, and those are the key things that I'm taking away from the summary and people's notes. If there's anybody who wants to disagree with that, please do say so.
It's the creation of a community through the built environment.
Yeah,
but it's on its way, definitely.
I would add to that sense of arrival.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Righty-ho.